coffee, obviously. All right, dog. She's in her place. She's good to go. During my quiet time this morning, I read something very interesting. Made me think about a whole chain of events throughout my past life, throughout my life as a Christian. And I remember when I became a Christian, it became very important to me to talk to my dad about it. My dad has told me many stories about Baptists. We were raised Catholic and that had come up to him at work and confronted him, and it was upsetting to him. And now here I wasn't a Baptist yet, but I was, I'm not seeing it, by the way, when I say I hadn't risen to that level yet, I don't mean it that way. I just had become a Christian, and I really wanted to tell him about the gospel and what was happening in my life. And I knew big changes were coming. And I remember the night I came to know Christ, I remember thinking, this could cost me everything. I knew some family wouldn't want to have anything to do with me anymore. I did lose friends. I knew that was going to happen, but wasn't sure about some. But, I went to my dad. I remember he goes, Travis, you think you're right about this. And there's people all over the world that have all these different beliefs. And you think the thing you believe is right. Now, this is not an uncommon sentiment among unbelievers and among people, but it's actually not an uncommon sentiment in the Bible in a way. It's very interesting that God tells Israel to do these very specific things. I mean, you read the Torah is just so specific. And at one point, in Deuteronomy, Moses tells them, he says, make sure that you don't worship the birds or the stars. These things are common among all. But God pulled you out of the fiery furnace, out of Egypt. He acted historically in a very specific way for you. If you read Genesis, the first parts of Genesis are about division. God is dividing. He's dividing things. This whole, what you would call an egalitarian concept, or making everything the same, I think is ultimately, when pushed too far, motivated by satanic forces. Whereas God actually divides. He's the one that shows differences and has specificity and says, this is the way things are. God broke into the history of my life through the person of Christ and gave me a very specific reality about himself that I was to embrace. And that is very hard for the unbeliever to accept. It seems to them that it creates division. Well, what did Jesus say? He said, I did not come to bring peace, I came to bring a sword, to separate. Okay? So don't be surprised when you're separate. You don't need me to tell you that, but certainly maybe some of you have had times, and we should be praying for Christians who are struggling with that exact thing. Being separate, being different is making them targets. And there's a lot of that going on all over the world all the time. And maybe even it's happening to you, and maybe in different levels of severity, but happening nonetheless. One last point that I just thought was so interesting that many have considered, I'm sure, but it just hit me, was kind of interesting that he said, if you make images out of these things that are common and worship them, it was like he was saying you're forgetting the history, because God did not present himself as an image, but rather he acted. We worship a God who acted. Now, he's not saying that we have to be careful, because he's not saying there aren't demonic forces that work behind these, smaller g gods. But what he is saying, though, is that your God did something specific, and these images are very general. They're open to everyone. So embrace this specific thing that God did. And in your life and in mine, that tradition continued through the work of Jesus on the cross, death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. And it's something that reality, that it is so specific, is difficult for the world to accept, and one we have to be ready to potentially even die for. Have a great day.